There's many prominent, nominally leftist creators on this platform who haven't actually been left for very long at all. Like, they've been on the left for 3, 4, maybe 5 years, or who really haven't been political for very long at all. And like half of them literally have videos on their channel where they freely admit this, like saying that they barely escaped the so-called alt-right, which is just sort of a lighter euphemism for fascism / neo-Nazism. Let's face it, just 2, 3, or 4 years ago. And they all have similar stories about how they were saved because they watched a video debunking Steven Crowder or Ben Shapiro or something. And I mean, if that's all it takes for you to completely change your ideology, you probably were just fucking a stupid dumb kid, let's be honest. And you know, that caused them to suddenly realize that non-white people are actually human, that maybe LGBT people should have rights. And this is often presented as if it's something they should be praised for. It's something that makes them some sort of special authority when, you know, that's completely illogical. If you were like a borderline Nazi a couple of years ago, I think it's safe to say that you don't really have nearly as much to offer on politics in general, okay? But whatever. That still, despite all of that, inspired them to make supposedly leftist content themselves, just like the people who de-radicalized them by pointing out the obvious that Ben Shapiro is a fucking dumbass. And the content they produce is as shallow as you would expect, being who they are, given the fact that they knew nothing about anything just a few years beforehand, right? It's what you'd expect out of someone like that, out of someone with that sort of background. And of course, someone like this knows nothing about the world. They barely know anything about their own surroundings, about their own country, less about the rest of the world. So they and their fans generally start out from the starting point that they had, which is that they always have this sort of extremely narrow focus on domestic political issues in the Anglosphere and Europe. And they generally fixate far more on the social issues in these countries rather than the overarching economic and structural causes that cause said issues predominantly. You know, they want welfare, free public services, and equal minority rights. That's it. Done. Nothing about remedying systems of exploitation, and especially nothing about remedying still existing neo-colonial systems of exploitation. They're quite happy to ignore the far-reaching imperialism of their countries as long as its fruits are redistributed equitably at home. That's fine. It's essentially this sort of, they like to call it leftist, but it's really like a sort of so-called new left, like 90s neoliberal ideology. And none of it is incompatible with neoliberalism. If you go to like neoliberal on Reddit, most people there will agree with this, you know. Accessible healthcare, welfare for people who are deemed to need it through means testing or whatever, and like LGBT rights, and equal rights for minorities. They all agree with that. It's completely compatible with modern neoliberalism, modern centrist neoliberalism. So, predictably, when it finally occurs to these people that the rest of the world and geopolitics are things that exist and that they could potentially gain profit or clout from talking about, they end up essentially just towing the line dictated by their own imperialist geopolitical bloc, by their own countries, by their own mainstream media, you know, the state dictates that they are used to consuming. They end up just like repeating these talking points, like the standard talking points verbatim, and at best trying to justify the usual imperialism in a different sort of way, with like woke sounding grunts that they use to justify the exact same exploitation and domination that they've engaged in for centuries. They're happy to denounce their bloc's designated official enemies, you know, Iran evil, China evil, Syria evil, in, you know, very sort of reductive, like dehumanizing terms that has no real analysis involved, just sort of like these repeating like the set phrases without even really knowing anything about these places or having looked into them at all. And that's not me saying that these governments are good or anything, or these countries are good or whatever at all. I'm saying that these people have an understanding of them that is just completely grounded in simplistic, propagandistic, buzzword repeating narratives that they hear from the mainstream media in their own countries. And, you know, so they're happy to denounce those sort of designated official enemies, but they will scarcely, if ever, say anything about the places they actually live in, whose politics they can actually meaningfully influence and really have an obligation to the rest of us in the rest of the world to influence, given how much their countries exploit people in the rest of the world. And the countries in question, they're actually quite a bit worse for the world than the official enemies that they have a whole lot to say about, okay? And this has obviously gotten a whole lot worse since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Because a bunch of people who previously never even knew that politics existed, outside of debunking anti-SJWs on YouTube, you know, outside of essentially saying things that any remotely sane person, any remotely decent person is going to agree with, which is incredibly easy to do, right? It's incredibly easy to debunk Ben Shapiro, to debunk Stephen Crowder, to debunk, you know, fucking J.K. Rowling transphobia or whatever. But now they're suddenly wading into a geopolitical landscape that they have absolutely zero understanding of, and acting like they have anything at all valuable to say, well, really, they're just throwing out the most generic buzzwords and talking points imaginable that they've passively picked up from the Western media and other know-nothing internet personalities who are just like them, who also picked it all up from the Western media. It's a huge feedback loop, basically. It's people who think they're progressive acting like they're enlightened, while they're really just uncritically parroting Western state propaganda verbatim with absolutely zero investigation.
If you don't trust the CIA, then who do you trust?
And others in similar positions hear that from them and then parrot it themselves, etc. That's what it is. So this brings us to the funniest, most ridiculous symptom of this that I've seen so far, and that's saying a whole fucking lot, man. This is an amazing clip from a British reformed alt-righter. That's not me slandering him. He has a video where he explains how he was an alt-righter quite recently, a few years ago, where he capped off his defense of Destiny, a streamer who has, in the past, openly called for the mass murder of anti-racist protesters by white supremacist militias by calling for the ban of anyone whose Twitch chat doesn't denounce the Chinese government enough. When I first saw this, I was like, there's no way, like, the tagline about this could be true, right? There's no fucking way. It has to be an exaggeration, but it wasn't.
I think maybe the argument you could make, also, if we're talking about Hassan, fucking hell, the last time I was on Hassan's stream, I was streaming while I was watching Hassan's. He was watching the UN. He was watching the UN condemnation of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the Chinese person was speaking, and Hassan's chat went fucking ballistic. Like, China simping. Like, TANKIE fucking, like, no genocide, woo fucking.
Why does he talk like this, for one? This is exactly what I mean. This is the level of analysis that you get from these people, given their origins, right? Like, they talk in these fucking, their own fucking language, like the Zoomer sort of like internet language that is just fucking ridiculous. Like, TANKIE China simping, ooh woo, no genocide. Dude, listen to yourself. Why are you like this? What the fuck? It's a series of buzzwords, half of which don't make any sense to any normal, well-adjusted person. TANKIE, ooh woo, China simping. Great analysis, dude. You really know a lot about China. You really have a really measured analysis of it. You're definitely not just essentially rephrasing what you hear in the mainstream media of your country, which is taken directly from the dictates of your state, which serves the interests of the bourgeois class of your state, and then putting it into fucking embarrassing Zoomer terms. Fucking TANKIE China simping, ooh woo. Fuck, man. Incredible.
Like, simping for the CCP and shit. And he doesn't do anything about that. Clearly he doesn't, because I know Hassan doesn't believe in that stuff himself. I think if Twitch was really concerned about like bad community policing or bad management or like carelessness and all that, like, yeah, Hassan would have been gone way before Destiny.
What? Hassan should be banned because people in his chat don't hate the Chinese government enough. Not even Hassan. People in his chat. Let's use this sort of logic here, right? There's plenty of people on Twitch who openly simp for the Dronie, Joe Biden. Joe Biden is straight up a war criminal by any reasonable measure. He was the vice president for 8 years in the Obama administration, guilty of countless war crimes, guilty of multiple ongoing occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, Joe Biden, in that time period alone, and he has a lot more shit to his name, he caused more undue pain and suffering that he was completely aware that he was causing and that he supported continuing to cause than every single criminal who has ever been executed in the history of the USA. Fact. Now, would my man here ever suggest that people who support Joe Biden or who don't denounce him sufficiently on Twitch should be banned? No. Of course not. Never. Never, ever. Not even close. Of course, right? Could you imagine him saying like, oh, you support the UK government? Not even that, like people in your chat are fucking supporting the UK government, man. You've got Dronie Simping there. You should be banned. It would make sense if you were banned for not policing your community. Would that ever happen? Could you ever imagine him saying that? No, of course not. Only China. Only the designated official enemies of the imperialist bloc that I'm at best a useful idiot for. There's a clear problem there. It's not any sort of real measured analysis of geopolitics, obviously. It's not any sort of real measured analysis of imperialism. It's campism. And in this case, his camp is the Western imperialist bloc. I wouldn't be like, oh, this guy supports Joe Biden, he should be banned. This guy supports the UK government, he should be banned. This guy's chat said Joe Biden isn't that bad, he should be banned. As much as I disagree with that, like, I wouldn't say that they should be fucking banned for saying it. This guy literally straight up, if you do not toe the Western imperialist geopolitical line, if you do not, like, believe everything that you are told by my Western imperialist bloc, who I tacitly support, you should straight up be deplatformed. Not even you, if your chat doesn't. You should be deplatformed, straight up. It's abundantly clear, like, what these sorts of prescriptions serve. Okay, it's fucking obvious. Like, any sort of perspective that doesn't, like, denounce the official geopolitical enemies of the Western imperialist bloc, which is, by the way, by far the worst in the world today, not even fucking close, man. You know, if you don't adhere to the same ongoing yellow peril narratives that this bloc has been engaging in for centuries now, if you don't denounce them in the terms that my state, my imperialist bloc dictates that you should do, you should literally be deplatformed. Not even you, your chat. And he would never say that about the US, about people who, for example, advocate for imperialist or imperialism in the US. Like, for example, if we were being morally consistent here, then he would be banned from Twitch. Because I'm sure in his chat you've got people who say that Joe Biden isn't actually that bad, that voting for the US Democrats is good. Ban. But, you know, the guy he's not interested in being morally consistent. He's interested in towing the state line on imperialism. And the Western state line on imperialism is that our adversaries, those who compete for us with power on the geopolitical stage, need to be denounced in the strongest possible terms, need to be legitimized in the strongest possible terms. And that leads to narratives like this. When you see people saying things like this, utterly, completely fucking insane things like this, like essentially just that contesting the most generic dog shit, yellow peril Western narratives on China should get you banned. Ooh, no genocide. If you don't think there are 1 million Uyghurs currently being industrially murdered in the new Holocaust, you need to be immediately banned. Because I read an article that said that was happening based on a game of telephone. That claim, which originated without any evidence from a random NED-funded NGO. It's abundantly clear that this serves Western imperialism. And it's pretty abundantly clear that it's meant to serve Western imperialism. Because at the end of the day, regardless of how he and others exactly like him, because he's pretty much a clone of dozens upon dozens of people at this point who all have the exact same views and who have like this feedback loop where they essentially leech off each other. It's like, oh, this guy's saying something that appeals to my Western imperialist sensibilities. This other guy is also saying the exact same thing. We're going to regulate the range of acceptable opinions between us, and we're all going to attack anyone who is not within this range. And we're all going to profit massively off it, also ensuring that we reframe radicalism as actually not being radical at all, and actual radicalism as being unacceptable. Now, it probably won't surprise you to know that this guy, his demands to outright deplatform doesn't end here. It doesn't end with saying that anyone who has a Twitch chat where people don't sufficiently engage in yellow peril narratives should be banned. He also thinks that anyone who denounces Israeli settler colonialism, the ongoing settler colonial genocide of the Palestinian people, should be banned too. This is him retweeting known genocide and settler colonialism
Praise
advocate,
be to Allah,
Aristocracy, who said that anyone who denounces her calls for the genocide of the Palestinian people and calls for that to continue to colonize them is an anti-Semite and they should be banned. So he retweeted this and then like doubled down on it like with 5 more tweets. So just to kind of drive home what he's supporting here, let me play some of the things that she said verbatim regarding the ongoing settler colonial genocide of Palestine, just to make sure that we understand where Lonerbox here stands in terms of Western imperialism, in terms of his advocacy for the downtrodden people of the third world.
It's kind of crazy to expect people to be like, well, you guys have to accept everyone.
and then watch that majority population turn it into an Arab pan state.
So clearly she's saying there that to her, she thinks that it would be wrong for Israel to be turned into a majority Arab state. To me, she prefaced that with, okay?
Where Jews become second-class citizens, saying, okay, like, you guys should just have to deal with that, right? You could just have to take the hit so you have the moral headway. It makes sense in a world where there are tons of ethnic and national and religious states, right? To at least have one for your own where you're safe, at least for just one country. And I think that that's totally valid.
She just stated at the end there that having an ethno-state is totally valid. She ended the statement with, I think that's totally valid. I think. Not, oh, if I were role-playing the average Israeli, that is what I would think. When she said that Palestinians cannot have the right of return, she explicitly said, I think, and to me.
I don't think Palestinians can ever get the right of return. Because as Vox mentioned, there's over 7 million. Those 700,000 have now become 7 million in terms of their descendants. I don't think there's no room.
I don't think that that's ever possible, I would assume she was going to say. There's no room. There's no room. She doesn't think there's room. She doesn't think, it's possible or that it can or should happen. That's her. She thinks that there should not be right of return for Palestinians. But, right of return for Jews who have literally never even lived in Israel, that's fine.
They can't come there, and
they can't come there.
Israel still remain a majority state?
She doesn't think that it can happen because if they come, then Israel won't be able to remain a majority Jewish state. She outright says it. That is ethno-nationalism. For her, the Jewish ethnic majority in Israel is important, something that needs to be maintained. This is the Western left. This is what these people support. This guy is essentially just going balls to the fucking wall, supporting an outright open genocidal settler colonialism advocate right there. There's a straight up ethno-status. She said it herself. To me, I think that's what he supports. Perfectly willing to try to frame anyone who's against that as being an anti-Semite if he thinks that they're not sufficiently supportive of the Western imperialist geopolitical narrative. So, according to generic British centrist number 5,000 million, if you're not as afraid of China challenging global white dominance as the media tells you to be, and obviously China's doing a lot more than just challenging global white dominance, but that is why the West hates China. That specific reason. It's why people like him hate China. That specific reason. Nothing else. That's why they denounce China constantly. It's why they think you should be banned from Twitch for TANKIE China simping, but they don't think that you should be banned from Twitch for Dronie America simping, okay? You gotta fear the yellow peril, or else. If you're not as afraid of that as the media and Western states dictate that you should be, you need to be banned and deplatformed. If you call out settler colonial advocates with their own words by quoting them verbatim, you should be banned and deplatformed. You are an anti-Semite. It's funny that this guy, he has 5 videos on his channel denouncing UK transphobia, but he doesn't seem to be capable of denouncing the bullshit anti-Semite allegations endemic in Britain that ruined Jeremy Corbyn, that specifically come with that. All of the UK transphobes are also these sorts of Zionists who call anyone who is against the Israeli settler colonization of Palestine an anti-Semite. That's kind of what makes this not surprising, because these things are mainstream positions among the British public in the first place, right? The only difference between him and your average Blairite is really that he's not transphobic. The only really sort of interesting thing here is that he's saying this while still seriously considering himself some sort of leftist. At least Blair...
Praise be to Allah.
Blair kind of had, the decency to stop framing himself as a leftist fairly quickly after he came into power. And he's really representative of a much broader tendency, a sort of predatory grifting among so-called influencers who make money off an impressionable, largely teenage to early 20s audience, convincing them that the politics that they're being fed are as radical as should be permissible, while they actually serve the status quo in Western countries, both domestically and geopolitically, just fine. In fact, they help to further it. These people are like the physical, actual personification of the movement of the Overton window further and further to the right. They want to limit the range of acceptable opinions as much as possible. This one even to the extent of literally banning from all platforms anyone who holds any position that doesn't simply parrot generic state propaganda regarding other countries and anti-colonial struggles around the world that the imperialist bloc that they are at best useful idiots for support. Now his reaction to this is going to be exactly his reaction in the video of him that we went over. This guy is a tanky China simp. Ooh, no genocide. Typical China simp. The problem with that is that I have a demonstrated record of critiquing and denouncing the Chinese government from back when this guy was a fucking neo-Nazi on 4chan. When this guy was posting fucking anti-Semitic conspiracy theories on Poll, I was making videos analyzing the actual implementations of policy in China by the Chinese government in depth. When he fucking thought that black people aren't human, I was actually looking at what actually happens in China, what they actually do there, and dissecting it and denouncing it in realistic terms, not in these propagandistic fucking terms that he throws out that he's passively absorbed and that are obviously incredibly racist most of the time. Honestly, now that I say that, like when I put it in those terms, it's fucking ludicrous to think that a guy who a few years ago was fucking posting clown pepes on 4chan is here now trying to tell you what to think about geopolitics, trying to tell you that you need to toe the Western imperialist line, otherwise you're a tanky China simp, non-genocide denier. Ooh. He's gonna say that to me regardless, and I'm out of focus. There we go, fixed. Because that's really all that he's got here. How can he possibly defend himself? He would never say the things that I said, he never would. It's that simple. Of course, there'll be no introspection, nothing like that. These people don't introspect. Their options here are to ignore this completely, change the topic to something unrelated, or to accept what I'm saying here. And he's not going to do that, trust me. So it's going to be tanky China simp, change the topic, not be like, maybe this guy has a point. Maybe I should actually do some introspection here and think about why it is that I'm willing to denounce China in these incredibly superlative terms, but I'd never really do so for my own governments. Why I prescribe specific action to be taken by big tech companies against people who have people in their chat who aren't as critical of China as I would like them to be, but why I don't also think this for people who aren't as critical of Western imperialism, which is infinitely worse than Chinese imperialism. You know, my critiques are actually grounded in research, in reality, not in framing China as some sort of like unthinking horde of people who just like want to take over the world from us uwu good white democracy spreaders, as a ridiculous yellow peril stereotype that just goes along the lines of the state dictates that I've just passively picked up throughout my life. So I'm sure my denouncements of China, my critiques of China, don't go nearly far enough for him or the other tacit or outright supporters of Western capitalist hegemony. His argument here and how it serves imperialism is so clear when you lay it out as what it is. You should be banned for not outright denouncing any country that's inconvenient for the white supremacist global dominance of the West. Conversely, endorsing Western governments and their endless and ongoing list of atrocities that are far worse, as, for example, Destiny, someone who he has made videos defending, who he has defended for hours on his stream, and that is the context of the clip that we played earlier, by the way. He was defending Destiny and Destiny's right to have a platform. Destiny, who is an outright advocate of US imperialism, he was defending that. He was defending him. And he doesn't think that Destiny should be deplatformed, not just his chat, himself saying those things. In fact, he defended Destiny's right to maintain his platform. So you can see the disconnect there. Destiny advocating for US imperialism, denying US genocides, etc. That's just fine and dandy. That's everyday normal free speech. Hassan's chat having people who don't denounce the Chinese government as much as he would like, ban him immediately. You can see how this argument serves imperialism. It's totally obvious when you lay it out like that. There's no argument against it. Very simple. And this is what the Western left is in 2020, unfortunately. And that's a tragedy for the rest of the world, because the rest of the world needs the advocacy, the domestic advocacy of the Western left for them against imperialism, against Western imperialism, which is by far the biggest problem in terms of geopolitics facing the third world today still. If there's to be any chance of third world countries escaping the ongoing Western domination and exploitation that has kept them down for centuries, we need the domestic left to be staunch advocates against it. We don't need them to misdirect by saying, what about China all the time? We need them to advocate against their own country's imperialism, but they don't. They would rather misdirect. What about China? What about China? Maintaining Western hegemony, fine and dandy. That's the saddest thing about the Western left. They are just completely happy with the global state of affairs as long as they can get free healthcare, free public services, and welfare out of the deal. And as long as there's legal equality for minorities. They're fine with it. And that is sad. That is so fucking sad. Most of the historical imperialism that meaningfully affects the modern world today was done specifically by Britain. Literally by Britain. Britain colonized more than half of the world and has invaded literally like 80% of the world militarily. The country that this guy is from. British colonialism built Britain. Everything that you have in Britain, regardless of whether you're an impoverished worker, the reason why you're nowhere near of an impoverished worker, as for example someone in Guatemala is, as for example someone in Kenya is because of your country's historical imperialism. You industrialized because of your imperialism. You industrialized off profits from slavery in the Caribbean. Read Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Williams. Irrefutable thesis. Yeah, British colonialism still exists. Where are this guy's videos about the fact that Britain is about to send a colonial fucking viceroy to the British Virgin Islands and take direct control of their colony, which they still have? Should you be banned for supporting that? No. Only if you have people in your chat who are TANKIE China simps. I do an impression of the ridiculous British accent, which is always a joke, but I can't do a good one. TANKIE China simps. He's probably going to be like, I'm Scottish, I'm not British. No, you're fucking British. Scottish people are British. Scotland, England, Wales. That is Britain. And yes, Scotland was an equal participant in historical and current British colonialism. I shouldn't have said was, it still is. So don't use that as trying to get as a fucking get a jail free card. The Scottish love to imagine themselves as victims of British colonialism, just because they have a separatist movement. But in reality, they were and are perpetrators and beneficiaries of it themselves, who in many cases even eclipse the English. 25% of the colonial officials, the colonial higher-ups in India, for example, were Scottish. There were countless Scottish colonies in North America. There are countless Scots who committed genocide against Native Americans. There are countless Scots slaveholders. And unlike some of the Irish people, for example, who went and did colonialism, unfortunately, despite their colonialism that was inflicted upon them, by the way, by many Scots, the difference is that in Ireland, the profits from colonialism were individualized. They never made it back home. In Scotland, the colonialism was systemic, a state partner in colonialism with England and with Wales. The Scottish slave ports were absolutely massive, some of the worst in the world. Scotland was a state
I'm consuming.
and societal participant in colonialism. Ireland wasn't. That's the difference. You were equal partners with England and with Wales. Functionally, when it comes to British colonialism, there is no distinction between Scotland, between Wales, between England. You are and were a team. It doesn't matter if you want to separate from Britain. You're still a team with them as far as colonialism goes. That's a fact. So that's no excuse. Anyway, there you go. The very essence of another generic liberal imperialist who for some reason frames himself as a leftist, not just as a leftist, but as the arbiter of what leftism is and should be. You know, another dissection done. There you go.